Okay, so understanding Selichos, the purpose, structure, and content. Purpose, structure, and content. Understanding Selichos. Just to be clear, by content, I don't mean we're going to run through a parish now on Selichos. That's not going to happen now. And that's something which I strongly recommend. Obviously, the more one invests in, more one takes out. This is true for the Yom Kippur in general. It's a big ask. Mitshmain Ezra. With however good your translation of Machzor might happen to be, to learn the Shmoyne Ezra in real time as we're trying to daven it under pressure. It's unrealistic. So at least we can prioritize until the Ikket for us, and that's certainly something that will come from this year. And prepare ahead. Indeed, learn it. It's not that different to learning a Mishnah. It's Divrei Chazal. In the case of the Yud Gimel, it's Psukim. It's a puzzle. A couple of Psukim. Learn it. It's definitely an investment that at least those have learned ahead of time, that we're not sort of having to sort of follow as we go along and then looking down at the parish and then it all starts getting a bit out of hand. But that's not what this year is for. Rather, I'd like to give the purpose, structure, and content. Says the Chaim Odom. Ba'avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Amo Yisrael. With the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Klal Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did a great tova to us, and v'tzivonu, and commanded us, loshuv lefanov, to do tshuva b'chol eish shenechto. Whenever one has done an avera, loshuv l'chayv, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the tova commanded us to do tshuva. Incidentally, little tip: Shabbos Shuvah drasha coming up is going to focus on this point. That's an accurate lashon. Is indeed there a mitzvah to do tshuva? Is going to be the topic. Okay. The answer may surprise you. Is there a mitzvah to do tshuva? Is going to be the Shabbos Shuvah topic, ably assisted by Rabbi. No pressure. That even though tshuva, says the Chai Adam, is good at all times. Obviously, we 3 times a day we're davening Hashavina Vina Sarasata. We're saying Slach 3 times a day. It's always good. Nevertheless, Chodesh Elul is the best. Mufcha Yoisa. Our tshuva is more readily accepted than other days of the year. Why? Because Sheyomim Elu Hem Yemei Rotzim. These have been Yemei Rotzim Me'es Nivcharnu La'on. From back when we were chosen as a people. Can't resist. The Shabbos drasha coming up is going to be on this subject. Are we the chosen people, or are we the people who chose? That's coming this year on Shabbos. But since the time we were chosen as a people, Har Sinai time, Matan Torah time, these have been Yemei Rotzim. Why? And it's important. Let's get the context. It'll open up all of Selichos for us. Because when Klal Yisrael did the Avera Chet HaEgel, after Matan Torah, when there was the Chet HaEgel, and the Luchais were smashed on Shiloh, the Tammuz, and we need to get the timeline clear. It's really important. It's well known, very well known, Moshe Rabbeinu went up on to Har Sinai, to the Rebbeinu Shem for 40 days and 40 nights. That's well known. But somewhat less well known is that he did it 3 separate times. A careful analysis of the Chumash for that, 3 separate times. And we need to go through to get the sequence of events, very relevant. Let's go through it. So the Mishnah in Tanis, of course, says, Shiloh and Tammuz, the Luchos were smashed. How do we know? So on the 6th of Sivan, Matan Torah, Shavuos. On the 7th, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to receive Kol HaTorah and the Luchos. Also, it says, the Yikol Moshe, the Yom HaShvi, on the 7th day, means from the Rosh Chodesh when they arrived at Sinai. And the passage says clearly, Moshe went up, Elahar, where he Moshe Bahar, Arboim Yoim, Arboim Yoim, 40 days, 40 nights, starting from the 7th, the day after Matan Torah. Says the Gemara, in Tanis, that's 24 days of Sivan, plus 16 of Tammuz, as your 40 complete days, day and night. The following morning, on the 17th of Tammuz, Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Har Sinai, sees the Egel, smashes the Luchos. At which point, Moshe Rabbeinu then davens on behalf of Klal Yisrael, Parshas Kisisa tells us, Vayimi Macharos, well, the next day, so the 18th of Tammuz, and Moshe says to the people, you don't chatos and chatal gedela, terrible. I'll go again to Hashem. Perhaps I can atone for your being. He goes back, and this is the Moshe Rabbeinu, the famous tefillah, forgive Klal Yisrael v'im ayin, and if not, mecheni no mistifracha. In Parashas Eikev, Moshe Rabbeinu repeats and tells us the story, gives us the detail. He says, I smashed the luchos, lay neichen in front of your eyes, and then I damaged Hashem, there's nothing for Hashem, Kori Shoina, like the first time, Arboim Yoim, Arboim Lola, another 40 days of that. And he was able, at the end of that 40 days of tefillah, on behalf of Klal Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, at the end of it, indeed, Psolacha, you can make a second set of luchos. And the Pasuk says, but Asa here, at that time, Hashem said to you, Omar Hashem Elai, Psolacha, Shnei luchos abonim, like the first one, Va'alei Elai Haran, come back up to me, to the mountains. This is the third.
Did you go down? You went down in between?
Yes, that's the point. He had to come down and told Alei again. Twice the psukim. So he went up 40 days of night, and then told to come back up again. So he came back down on, it works out, Chof Ches Av, 28th of Av, which when he came down the middle, 40. And he's told the next day to come up, which means he went back up on Chof Ches Av. He went up for the third time. Pasuk's clear. And I write to them, the Hayei Nochin Aboy could be ready in the morning. That's why we know it's the 29th, down 28th, then the 29th. But Olisa of Aboy in the morning come back up El Har Sinai, but it's after Lishom Al Rosh Hashanah, which he does.
It's not Rosh Hashanah. Is it not Rosh
Hashanah? Yes. So I'm doing is I'm taking through Seder Olam now, but I admit the Chaya Olam does say Rosh Hashanah, but it's true to say the Olam, which is the Brisa. The Tana does the cheshbon I'm giving you now from this psukim. But the point will still, I tried to word it soon that I could incorporate it. It's a good, sharp. So we're now the third one, which Rabbi goes up again for 40 days and 40 nights. And it's there, at that point, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu teaches Moshe Rabbeinu Seder Tefillah and the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachman. Right? Vayered Hashem ba'olam b'yisyatz v'yishon v'yikro v'shem Hashem v'yav Hashem ha'pano v'yikro Hashem kerach v'chon ha'eretz ma'rachas v'emes, and the next boss. So the Moshe Rabbeinu went up 3 times, and he was there all Chodesh Elul, at least all Chodesh Elul, and remained there up until Yom Kippurim, so the 10th of Tishri. That's if you work out, do the numbers. Which was the end of the Kapara. That was achieved at that point. So that third visit, when the Kapara is going to be given, is when Rabbi Hashem teaches Moshe Rabbeinu this Seder Tefillah. Says the Brisa Seder Olam, Moshe Rabbeinu came down on Yud Tishri, which is Yom HaKippurim, and told Klal Yisrael that indeed they received a full kapara, the Salachta, Lavinenu, the Chatasenu, the Chaltam, as the Pasuk says. Lefichach, says the Tana, Lefichach, Niskayim Yom Zeh, this day, 10th of Tishri, was Mekuyim Choik Uzikaron L'Doiris, for all future generations. A Choik Uzikaron Shalema, the Pasuk, after the Avodah, Nacharemais, the Avodah of Yom Kippurim, says, L'Hoysa Zois Lachem, L'Chukas Olam, L'Chapel Bnei. So this will now be a fixed date to atone for Klal Yisrael, the Kol Chatos on Achas Bashana once a year. Yom Kippur was set from then for all future days. So far, we've said what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing during this time. Then we're going to elaborate. What Moshe Rabbeinu was doing on behalf of Klal Yisrael. He was not involved in Chet HaEgel. Moshe Rabbeinu was not there. He said, on behalf of Klal Yisrael, we know what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. What about Klal Yisrael? What was Klal Yisrael doing during that time that Moshe was working and davening to gain a kapara for them? Tana Devei Eliyahu, a medrash. Tana Devei Eliyahu. Yisrael Hayunayagim. Obviously, they weren't just relaxing while Moshe was davening on their behalf. The Moshe wanted to destroy the whole of Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu was davening not. What was Klal Yisrael doing? Yisrael Hayunayagim Kol Oisam Hayam. All those days, certainly all of Elul, a little bit before, or not, till Yom Kippur, Soyim v'tanis, they were fasting. And the final day of Yom Achron Shabbakulam the Hanger Basar B'Tishri goes to Tanis with Lomi B'Tanis. It goes to Tanis and the whole of Klal Yisrael, and they fasted overnight. That's the full 25 hours. That's the Yom Kippur Tanis which we have. Ulefichach says the Talmud of Elul. That's Klal Yisrael were Isaac the whole of Elul and the 10 days of Tishri. Then doing Teshuvah and fasting. Ulefichach Nikva Isa Yom. Again, Talmud of Elul, same thing. That 10th of Tishri was fixed to Hani Yom Kippur the Kapar LaOlam. It's a Kapar of that was. So says the Chaim. Seeing as those days were Yomei Rotzon, then those were days when Klal Yisrael were being given the Sratzim to the Bajim, given the Kapar of us, doing Teshuvah through Chodesh Elul and through the 10 days of Tishri. L'chein b'chol shana every single year. Misoirer oid harachmim lamala. Rachamim is awakened and increased in Shemayim. The Haim Yemei Ratzon. This is, I often speak it up. This is the principle that Rav Dessler brings B'Shem his Rebbe, a Tzvi Hirsch Breda from Calvin, who said that we don't keep Yomim Tovim, we don't commemorate Yomim Tovim, because back then there was a day of Kapara on Yom Kippurim, so we were going to commemorate that. But no, we don't. We travel inside time. There's a cycle of time, and when we come to again Yom Tishri, we come again to Yom Kippur. That is the time which has been fixed into the world that the Rebbe provides Kapara, and likewise, as the Chaim is saying here. The whole of Chodesh Elul and the build-up to that was a time when there was Rotzon and Rachamim from HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Tshuva taking place. That's been fixed into the Bria from the time of Matan Torah. That this year as well, when we do it, we're not commemorating the Tshuva they did. We're tapping into that availability that was then. We have it now. Now, seeing as, that's the basic principle, that's the framework. Seeing as when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai the third time, Klal Yisrael blew a shofar in the Machane. There was a shofar being blown to make known to Klal Yisrael, don't make the mistakes again, and of course, to be ma'or them, like the nature of a Tkiyah shofar is, to do Teshuvah, which they needed desperately to be doing. And therefore, our minhag is involved that through Chodesh Elul we blow the shofar. Besides the Erev Rosh Hashanah, where we want to separate from Tkiyas, which are the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, from this minhag. Likewise, there were those who had the minhag, say the posting, to fast the whole of Chodesh Elul, as Klal Yisrael fasted the whole of Chodesh Elul back then. Not straight. The Elef HaMogin on the Matei Ephraim says, and this is something which can be developed for Yom Kippur perhaps, but the Soid Ikka HaTarnas, really what a Tarnas is doing, is like a Mizbeach Lechape, Mizbeach for Kapara, for want of it, because by reducing one's eating and drinking, one is being mismayit, one's chelboy v'domoi, the chelev and the dam, is being reduced in a person, which is in a small sense of being maked. These are the two parts. I'll put on Mizbeach, chelev and dam, the place on Mizbeach as a kapara. It's in a small sense, our not eating and drinking is us providing that carbon of ourselves. And I'll come back to carbon of ourselves when it gets Rosh Hashanah short. However, says the Chaim Adam, it's not a ein roy linag b'tanis. One should not get into doing tanis, fasts. Elamishu Adam Bori, a person is very healthy. He's writing this. He was a bachutan of Ramadan, okay? To about 250 or so years ago, when people certainly were more robust and healthy than we are now. Should not get involved in tanis unless you're an Adam Bori, healthy person. The idea, the vad, and you know for certain shatanis in mazal tanis not harm you. I'm not talking about when we have a chiyuv tanis. I'm talking about these additional tanisim. They know about Talmud it won't make you mavatal from Talmud Torah. Who can say that? Right? They have today of tanis, and you learn is not going to be the same. Our B'doyer is halalim, he says back then. She'olnu chalushe koach, when we're a bit schwach, we're quite weak. Yoisa tov she'ich, better to eat a bit. The Yilmaid Kiflaim and learn double. Right? Rather than, And the Elef Hamogin on the Matei Ephraim adds to that. Do you know why? Kishkidas Torah, working hard and learning Torah, utfila bekavana, and tefillah with kavana, mezakekes, purifies a person, yoisa harbe mitanesim, a lot more than tanesis. Learning, davening with kavana does a lot more for your neshama than tanesis. That's a perspective. Now, seeing as these are days of tshuva, Elul, so the minhag was, the minhag is in many places and many healers in Klal Yisrael to get up early, the whole of Chodesh Elul, and to say Selichos and Tachanonim right the way through. Us B'nai Ashkenaz are nayeg not to do the whole of Chodesh Elul. We have to blow shofar. Yes, we say the Dov Hashem Ori, but we don't get up for Selichos the whole Chodesh Elul. Rather, the minhag was 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. 4 days, but that's what the minhag came from. We'll see why we are doing what we're doing. Everyone got the time change. We'll see soon why we're doing what we're doing this year. But the minhag was 4 days before Rosh Hashanah to start saying Selichos. Reason being, aside from that earlier minhag of the whole of Chodesh Elul fasting, there was a minhag to fast 10 fasting days. That's how she made sort of 10 fasting days. But you can't fast the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, you can't fast Shabbat Shuvah, and you can't fast Erev Yom Kippur when there's a mitzvah to eat. So 4 of your 10 days are gone. So they would fast 4 days before Rosh Hashanah to make up the 10 days of fasting. So Selichos were that B'nai Ashkenaz took on to do Selichos during the fast days, when generally the minhag was to fast. However, when you have a year when Rosh Hashanah will fall, where that you don't have 4 days in the week like now, you'd have to move it to the previous week, and so that it wouldn't be sometimes like this, sometimes that day. So to have a fixed, if it moves to the week before, we start from the beginning of that week. That's why we're starting with Shabbat Sunday from the beginning of next week, a full week before. So sometimes you have less slicha, sometimes more. Another reason why 4 days, I said 4 days was to make up the 10 danasis. Another reason for the 4 brought in the Paiskim is because a carbon, so I come back to it, a carbon required bikur from mum 4 days. You'd have to keep an eye on a carbon for 4 days before you bring it that doesn't have a mum that's able to, it's fitting to bring as a carbon. And if you look in Parashas Pinchas, you've got a list of all the carbonos, all the different Yom Tovim. The pasuk says, "V'ikravtem oila." You shall be makriv, bring a carbon oila. On Rosh Hashanah, it says, "Va'asisem oila." You shall make an oila. Say Chazal, to teach you that on Rosh Hashanah, a person should make oneself into an oila. Make on Rosh Hashanah, make yourself a carbon. Be makriv oneself, in a sense. We can't fast. Do that before, and therefore we wanted the Selichos beforehand as the 4 days before to ensure we don't have a mum when we're makriv ourselves in Rosh Hashanah. That's it, brought in Paiskim. Now, Rabbi Chaim in Shemais says the following: nowadays, we're in Galus. They learned Kohen Gadol l'chapa chatasei. We don't have a Kohen Gadol to l'chapa for our bears. The avoida. V'loy mizbeach l'hakriv olav karbonos. We don't have a mizbeach to bring karbonos. V'loy beis hamikdash l'spala b'soichai. Nor beis hamikdash to daven inside. It's very clear. It's a mistake people make. Beis hamikdash be'ikah was a mock and tefillah. Not for now. Loy nishal lonu l'fnei Hashem, says Rabbi Noachim. All we have left before Hashem is built into our Seina, our tefillahs, the Yud Gimel Midaisam, the Yud Gimel Midas, Arachim. That's all we have. The Makar of saying Selichos, where does it come from to say Selichos? I've said why on those days. I've dated it. And I've explained why, the background, the context to why these are days of Ratzon, but where does the minhag itself of saying Selichos come from? What's the Makar of Selichos? So the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah It's nine or base. When Moshe Rabbeinu mentioned the possible very briefly before, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up the third time and achieved Kodesh Baruch, the apostle says, taught him, gave him over these Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. Says the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Vayavar Hashem al Panav Vayikra. Says Rabbi Yochanan, if a pasuk wouldn't say it, we could never say it. The source in the pasuk is the pasuk says Rishonim Ritva Limadai Vayavar. We talk about when you go before a chazan goes before the teva to daven. We talk a lot of Vayavar as well. Al Panav, a chazan puts a talis on his head, on his face. Focus. Says the Gemara Rabbi Yochanan, Melamed shenes atef HaKadosh Baruch Hu k'shliach tzibur. That, say the Shana, of course, mean in a Mara Nevuah, in a vision of a prophetic vision, HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu him, Kaviyach, Hashem himself, wearing a talis like a chazan, like a shliach tzibur. The herald Moshe Seder Tefillah showed Moshe Seder Tefillah, the order of prayer. All I said in Kozman, she saw fight to never cast on the Naveras, Yasu, Lefonai Keseda Hazad, do before me. Not say before me, do before me. This Seder, Vani Meichel Hanavi Meichel. Says Rabbi Yehuda, there's a brisk crucial, there's an assurance given that She'enon Chezrus Reikim, they never come back empty-handed. Somebody might be tempted to ask, but many times we've davened, and perhaps one can say, maybe they do sometimes come back empty-handed. Ask the Al Shech HaKodesh. Says Al Shech HaKodesh, because read what it says. It doesn't say them. Do them. Yasu lefonai kaseda hazeh. These Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim become them when you're saying it to the Rebbeinu Shalom, that in a Chayzer Regan. Klausel becomes a Racham and a Chanan and a Erech Apayim, and then you say the Yud Gimel Midas, you've learned them from the Rebbeinu Shalom, those don't come back empty-handed. On Yom Kippur night, we also say Selichos, first night, only the night, married, we say Selichos. And the minhag on Yom Kippur night is we wear a talis. A talis. Originally, in times of Rishonim, it was only the Chazan wore a talis, not the whole tzibur. Many reasons given why we wear a talis. Says Rosh Soloveitchik, borrow to him, clear to him. The reasons is very clear. Because when saying Slichas, the Chazan, the Shliach Tzibur, stands, so to speak, b'mokem HaKadosh Baruch. What was shown to Moshe Rabbeinu on Alahar, b'Mara Nevuah, as the Gemara tells us, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, being the Shliach Tzibur, Nis'ativ b'talis. And that's why the halacha is, says the Taz, the Shliach Tzibur for Slichas wears a talis. And says Rosh Soloveitchik, that's why on Yom Kippur night, when we say Slichas, we wear a talis. Likewise, he explains, the Ramah says we have to, when it comes to Slichas and Yom Noraim, says the Ramah, we are careful to find a Shliach Tzibur Chazan who's Hayosa Hogum, the Hayosa Godel Batayra, Uba Maisim, as much the best person you can find. Why? Says Russell later, because he's, so to speak, being Oimeh, the Mocker, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. Very quickly, the Briskerov was once asked, Shaila. They had on the one hand the Chazan, who's a phenomenal Talmid Chacham, brilliant gone. Musically, Chazan-wise, not the best. And there was another Chazan who was certainly not on his level as a Talmid Chacham, but he was a beautiful Chazan, very enjoyable to hear. What should they prioritize? They asked the Briskerov. And the Briskerov said, I don't get the question. So far, you've got one Talmid Chacham and one Chazan. I thought you were looking for a Chazan. So that's the context of that. But if you do have two musically good, except Chazan, then of course you choose the one who's greater, because they're Oimid B'Mokem Kaviyach for the Shechina. Slichas is referred to in the Gemara as Seder HaTfilah. Seder Tfilah. That's why we have a dim like a Shliach Tzibur, and that's why we have to stand. The Chazan, we stand for Slichas, because it's like Shemoneh Esrei. Seder Tfilah. It's like a Shemoneh Esrei. You see this theme quite a lot. Slichos is treated like a Shemona Esrei. We stand. The Ikar of Slichos, of course, is the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. Hashem Hashem Kerachim. The vidui which we add. Why is there vidui in Slichos? Because the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim are a bakosha, a request from Hashem for Rachamim and Slicha and Kapara. And we've got a cloud. We know that you're not going to ask for Slicha if you haven't done b'makayim, so you haven't had vidui prepared. You have to do vidui.
Should they go the way around then?
I know. It's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Why?
You should put the video in first.
So they you're
asking.
Yes. And when you say vidui, you have to stand. The Gemara and Yuma. So we're standing there as well. Says the Levush. Sim Tov Shuvei Aleph. We start with Ashrei. Why? We start with Ashrei and then we say Chatzi Kaddish. Kaddish afterwards. You know why? Shetikun Chachomim Hu, as Takon of Chazal, L'oilam Achar Shem Psukim. Whenever we said Psukim, we say a Kaddish afterwards. We start with Ashrei in order to say a Kaddish. We want to start with a Kaddish. At the end of Slichos, we say a Kaddish Sholim with Tiskabel. Tiskabel, normally we only say after a Shemona Esrei. Tiskabel Tzoloisain. Tzoloisain means a Tefillah, Shemona Esrei. We need to be Makabel our Shemona Esrei, our Tefillah. Why are we saying Kaddish Tiskabel at the end of Slichos? Asked the Levush. Answers, because Slichos is a Seder Tefillah. It's established like Tefillah. The psukim which we say before, we start with Shemea Tefillah. A long list of psukim, mainly from Tehillim, which we say beforehand. Says Rav Soloveitch, that's the general principle we have. You don't ask Hashem for a question before you praise the God, before you know who you're talking to. That's why we start our Gimel Rishonos, the first few brachos with Shemona Esrei, before we start with our bakashas. So we start with our Ashrei in order to be able to say a Kaddish. To start with Bima Kaddish Hashem. Then we say a long list of psukim, getting clear, and we can delve into more detail. If you look closely at the psukim, you'll see they mirror the Gimel Rishonos, the first few brachos of Shemona Esrei. Then we're ready for our bakosha, which is our Ikar Slichos, which is coming. So says the Levush, the psukim we say before are connected psukim to Zimah. That's like the same setup. The Slichos is Yud Gimel Midas, is our Shemona Esrei, so to speak. Then we have Tachanun. We say Tachanun afterwards, with additional Tachanun style tefillahs. Like says the Levush, I could call tefillahs after every tefillah. You would say a Tachanun. And then, of course, you have the Tiskabel, like you do after every tefillah. You finish off with the Tiskabel. The Slichos, which we're saying, the Slichos which we're going to be doing, starting ahead of Rosh Hashanah, Slichos likewise in first night Yom Kippur, Slichos by Ne'ilah. We must keep in mind it's not merely a magic formula. Come back to the Ashach HaKodesh. Moshe Rabbeinu was shown a Seder Tefillah to do. We spoke about the Seder Tefillah, how Chazal, you see the minhag, how things been structured very carefully. The ikra of it, though, is a Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim that will not go back unanswered if we become them when we say them. Yiratzim, we should be zoicha to not only say them but to do them, with the guarantee of mechila which we will have from that. We should be zoicha to the news like Moshe Rabbeinu came down then, and it's back. We're back into that time where we'll be told v'salachta labeneim l'chataseim l'chaltonu, and also along with the rest of Klal Yisrael, we should be zoicha, not like Rabbeinu back here said. Rather, we are be able to say we are no longer in Golus. We do have a Kohen Gadol l'chapach kol chatiseim. We do have a mishbeach to makriv korbanos. We do have a Beis Hamikdash with David inside it. Meira, Yameinu Olei.
Think this way. It could be that Teshuvah comes before Vidui, because Teshuvah is the internal part